Welcome to the Startup Grind.
This is, not something that I actually talk about quite often, but I'm asked in sort of personal situations where I'm speaking one-on-one with an entrepreneur or I'm giving advice to a student. I'm often asked this question, and so I thought it was an interesting opportunity to talk a little bit about this. And so when I talk about the myth of the work-life balance, what I actually mean is that people often say, how do you achieve it, right? And what I say is, once you accept that it doesn't exist, life gets a lot better. And a lot of people sort of look at me in horror when I say this, but in reality, I think when you peel back the onion of the way any person's life works in a startup or in an intensive work environment, you're just never going to find that description of what balance appears to imply. Sort of what this woman looks like, she's just sort of in a very steady state. So I thought it'd be helpful to just start off a little bit about myself. I finished a PhD in 2010. I co-founded FLOODGATE, which is an early seed stage investing firm with Mike Maples in 2008. On top of that, so just to give you a sense of when these little munchkins appeared, Abigail was born in 2006, so in the middle of my PhD program. Aaron, the boy up there, was born in 2009. And I defended my PhD 6 weeks after I gave birth, while I was working full-time at FLOODGATE. And then the little baby appeared in 2011. And so it's quite a full life. I sit on 10 boards. As was mentioned, I teach at Stanford 1 quarter out of the year. And I'm a mom, and I am a wife to someone who is also a high-tech exec. He works at Intuit. And so, as you can imagine, life is really, really busy for us. But it's actually, as you can see, we have all smiles. We're having a lot of fun. So I like to describe sort of what my life was like before Abby. So I always call it BA, right? So before Abby, we worked hard, we played hard. There's no me in here, but I imagine we used to actually go dancing. I was involved in a triathlon. I was, in grad school, had a lot to do, but also had a lot of free time as well. These days, I was looking through all of my pictures from the last year, and I was trying to figure out what picture represents best what play hard represents for me. And I found this picture from last year, that's me right there, and that's our 6-year-old's birthday party. And we're playing freeze dance, and it looks almost like I'm having a better time than the other 6-year-olds. But this is sort of our life now. This is the Miuras and the Kos together. And so what I wanted to talk to you about was, what does that all mean? How, for people who may or may not even have children, how do you actually even think about the whole element of working really hard, but then figuring out some time for yourself? So before I start, I thought I'd mention all of this is deeply personal, right? So I'm going to try to give you some principles that I live by, but then also how does that actually turn it into actionable things that are more universal. But my principles may not be matched to yours because they're really matched to my own personal circumstances and to who I am, right? So I have some sets around what I wanted to do. So I thought I would start off with the 3 myths of work-life balance. And this is actually my daughter when she was born. She had this t-shirt called "Sleep is for the Weak." And I thought it was particularly funny because last night my 3rd child was up from 2 to 5 in the morning. And I had stayed up until midnight preparing this presentation, which, if it's wanting, that's the reason why. So let's start with the 3 myths of work-life balance. 1, you don't get it all, right? And so this is one of the things that I always had trouble with in terms of work-life balance. I look at these other women, other men who seem to have it all, and it always seemed to me like something has to give, right? Like something at home is missing, something's not going right, but they look like they have this outwardly perfect existence. And in my case, I give up a lot of stuff. So as an example, this would be, even though this is not exactly my living room, this is what my living room may look like when I go to sleep. I don't have a perfectly clean house. The reason why, if anyone is invited over to our house, they come on a Friday night, it's because our house cleaner came on Friday afternoon, and that's probably the only moment our house is ever clean. The first 2 rooms when you walk into our house, which we've had for 2 years, are unfurnished. I haven't had time to buy furniture for our living room or our dining room. So we just spend all of our time in our family room. And people will come in and they'll say, "Did you just move in?" And I'll say, "Well, 2 years ago." And then I realize it's because that we have this vast expanse. So, our home life, especially if you look at our actual home, it's not pristine. There are things that are missing, but we still manage. And so I feel like the most important rooms, like our bedrooms, are furnished. We have a place to eat. We have a place to sit and watch TV. So the most important things we get, but we don't have it all. The second point is I don't do it all by myself. And when you hear all the talk around Marissa Mayer or Sheryl Sandberg, this is one of the first things people point out. Well, they have so much help. Of course they have so much help. Everyone should have a lot of help. And it's not all paid help, right? So for me, if you look around, it's my mom at the top. I'm fortunate. I grew up in Palo Alto, so my mom and my dad live 3 miles away. And so anytime I have to stay out late, my parents come over. I have a wonderful nanny, and she works probably 50 hours a week. But she is amazing for us. And I feel like people like that are always in the background. They're never recognized, but it's precisely people like that that allow me to go to work without really worrying all the time. I have a partner who I work with, Mike Maples, who has never really, complained or said anything, or has always just been extraordinarily supportive whenever I have to do something that's family related. And because of that, we just have a great dynamic within our firm where if he has to take care of his kids, that's just part of our firm. My daughter's first grade teacher is part of that community, right? We live in Menlo Park. We have amazing schools. Our teachers are so amazing that, I just sit back and I listen to my daughter talk about the fact that she knows who Martin Luther King is. I never mentioned him. It's because our teachers taught my children. I have a great assistant, and she's the one who sort of holds my calendar and makes me accountable for my time. And then I have a husband who is truly the partner that Sheryl Sandberg often talks about, that 50-50 partner at home. So I never have to do the dishes. I'll cook, but he always does his dishes. He does his own laundry. And so there's a real partnership. He also, helps the kids go to sleep at night. And so there's always just, there's a real partnership. I can really count on him for the most important things. So as you can see, it's not just something that I do on my own. So when people say, "How do you do it all?" I don't do it all. I actually only do a fraction of it, right? And it's truly a huge community that comes together and operates and supports and works together to help us do the things that we want to do in our personal life, whether it's raising children or have hobbies and interests outside of work. But those are all very important components when you want to have a life outside of work, and I think we all want that. And then the last is sort of, when we talk about work-life balance, it turns into this, I always imagine like balance as being a Zen-like state, right? This meditation kind of symbolism comes to mind, and I think that that's just not the way it is. You have to go and get it. It's much more of an active form of doing something than it is a passive form. So expecting work-life balance to come to you, it will never happen. You have to go and seek it out personally. And so that's the next part that I wanted to talk about, which is really, what is it anyway? What does it feel like? What is it to you? So again, this goes back to the notion that it's a deeply personal thing. So if I talk about work-life balance for me, it means a very connected and supportive marriage, right? So I'm not just saying that I have a marriage, but I have to talk about specifically what it means to me. So when I talk about that, I say it has to be deeply connected, deeply supportive. A relationship with and knowledge of my children. So not just that we play together, but that I know who they are. I know what their favorite colors are. I know what movies that they love. I know the characters in those movies, and I can talk to my children about it. And then the last piece, which is a challenging but also an interesting profession. And I think this list can change for any person. When I was in grad school before I had kids, it was that I wanted to work out, and I wanted to be a triathlete at that point, and I wanted to study hard and be at the cutting edge of technology, and like I had this boyfriend, and I really wanted to have a good relationship with him. But over time, it's changed, and so I think for each and every one of you, you probably have 3 or 4 things you prioritize. The first step for me to achieve all of this is actually controlling my calendar. So in the background, you'll see sort of this faded version of what my calendar looks like on almost any given week. And it goes usually from somewhere around 8 o'clock to 6 p.m. And it's, as you can see, kind of back to back. Sometimes about 1 to 2 times a week, I have an event, and I limit it to 2 times a week. So if I have more than 2 events at night, my assistant isn't allowed to schedule anything more. I believe actually a sustainable work week is about 60 hours, and this is something I talk to my startups about pretty openly. I think that the 100-hour weeks, I know that some of our startups are pulling, is not sustainable at the end of the day, but the 40-hour week is not going to make you competitive in those scenarios. So 60 hours, we've talked to a lot of executive coaches about this, and it feels like the resonance is that 60 hours is really hard, but it's also very doable and sustainable. And if you hold yourself to that and you go back and you take out all the hours that you're surfing the internet, and you take all the hours out that you're just sort of looking up Facebook, then and ask yourself, are you actually working 12 hours a week, or 60 hours a week? It's actually, it's very difficult. And so sometimes what we do within our firm is we'll do a time audit, and we'll say, how are you spending each hour block? And you have to be very honest, because it's only for yourself. And you say, how much of your time are you spending on different facets of your business or your personal life? And does it add up to roughly 60 hours for your work? And also, how do you allocate those 60 hours? And so especially in venture capital, and I think in almost any profession, your most valuable asset actually ends up being your time. It's not your dollars and cents, it's nothing else, it's your time. And so are you spending too much time working on email? And is email now your workflow? Or are you controlling that? How many hours did you spend on mercy meetings where you knew 5 minutes in that this meeting was not valuable to the other person, it wasn't valuable to you either, right? And how much of your time do you want to allocate to mentoring people? All of those things you have to figure out ahead of time and then see how you're doing with respect to that. And so occasionally what we'll do is we'll take these cards, and basically a note card, and we'll say, how was the last hour spent? And we have 10 categories that we could say we spent it against. And at the end of the week, we'll see how we've spent our time. If you do that over the course of about 6 weeks, you'll start to see a rhythm and a pattern. And you can start to assess whether or not you're spending your time wisely. We've found that that is absolutely essential in order to really diagnose whether or not you are doing the right thing around your calendar. And then the last piece is, can you free up some time, which is maker time? And Paul Graham has talked about this in the past. If you don't have 3-4 hour chunks where you can actually work on something and build something, a lot of times you're just responding to inbound requests. And so it's very important in any given week to try to free up 3 to 4 hour chunks where you can actually spend time working on the things you most want to work on, rather than have other people make demands upon your time. This is another really important point, which is set clear boundaries. And I feel a little bit badly even saying this because, again, these are all rules that I'm trying to follow myself, but I break them all the time, right? But these are principles that I'm trying to bring into my life. So set boundaries. And so one of my non-negotiables usually is, if one of my kids is sick, I take them to the doctor, no one else. In fact, today one of my kids is sick and I just can't take him to the doctor. So my mom is taking him to the doctor. But this is one of those things where I actually had to sit down and figure out, at least in principle, what are my non-negotiables? So for me, there are doctor appointments. I want to be able to spend one day out of the month in the classroom with my kids for an hour. And those are the only two things that and then the 2 times a week is the maximum number of events I'll have in a week. You know, I've seen this model for other people. Some people will say, you know, how many nights out a week do they spend on work stuff? How many nights do they spend working on email, and how late will they do that? How early do they plan on waking up? So I typically wake up around 5 o'clock in the morning. And the reason why is because I won't receive emails back from anyone who's on the West Coast at that point. But those are the things that I like to define. I say, you know, what are the things that I decide to do? How do I hold myself accountable? But lastly, you know, what do I keep people from coming into my life? And so if I'm at a piano recital for one of my kids, that's not going to be interrupted. If I'm on date night with my husband and I get emails, I'm not looking at emails at that moment. So those are things that we try to do, at least within our marriage and within our family life. And then the third thing, this is the thing I struggle most with, which is be present. So, and this is whether you're in a meeting or whether you're reading a bedtime story to your kids, or you're giving mentoring advice to a student. All of these things it's just be present in that moment and don't be thinking about the 10 other things you need to be doing at that moment. And I have a huge problem with this. You know, when I'm trying to put my kids to bed at night, 9 times out of 10, I'm thinking about the email that I need to write. As soon as I put the kids down, they go to sleep. And my husband is a much better role model for this, and I've seen that, you know, other people that I know in my life are much better role models for this than I am. But this is something that I'm always trying to keep in the back of my mind, which is slow down and really be present in that moment. Even in a business meeting, that actually can change the entire nature of that meeting and what you learn from that person. And so this is something that I'm very much working on that I still haven't mastered yet. But the thing that it said in terms of be slow and be present, doesn't mean you slow down. So the last 2 principles that I thought I would really bring to this audience was, you know, this is so cheesy. Like, I was trying to figure out something about, you know, do what you're passionate about, and I started looking for images on Pinterest, and of course this is what I got. Do what you love and love what you do, right? And this is something that my dad used to say to me in Japanese, and I think that's really important. And I oftentimes say this to my students at Stanford. I say, really, try to find something that you love. Don't start a company because it's going to be successful and you'll make gobs of money. Do it because there's something in that problem that you're really attracted to. And the reason why that's important is that's the kind of passion that investors get attracted to and employees also get attracted to. One of the most important parts of what we invest in is the narrative of the founder. And ultimately, that means it's the story that the founder is able to tell us about why that person is uniquely built to build this business. So a great example of that is an investment that I made in Modcloth, where for some reason, the day that I heard the pitch for the first time for Modcloth, there were about 4 other fashion startups that came in that day. And I was looking at it I brought in a couple of my students from Stanford to just take a look at some of these pitch meetings. And all of the other fashion startups were led by 2 engineering guys. And in each of them, I asked them, why fashion? You know, do you read Vogue magazine? Can you not live without going to Barney's when they have their yearly clearance sale, right? Do you when Fashion Week happens in New York City, are you dying inside because you weren't there? These other startups, they all said, I don't even know when Fashion Week is, right? And yet, when I met Susan, it was just a completely different story. She says, I've been vintage clothing shopping since I was 12 with my grandmother living in Florida. And then I went to college, and I realized I was buying clothes that weren't even in my size because they were great vintage finds. And then my closet filled up. And then I had to sell it. And so I turned to my boyfriend at the time, and I asked him to put up a site. And on the first day, I sold something. That is a compelling pitch. Because from that is an organic vision of why community bloomed within Modcloth. It's the reason why Susan is absolutely integral to the company and will always be integral to the company. And so for us, what we're looking for is our founders who feel this way about what they do. For me, when I got started at FLOODGATE, as I mentioned, I was a PhD student at Stanford. I actually went and met Mike Maples because I had heard he had great deal flow. And I had an idea for a business, but I wanted to compare it against what angels that day were seeing. And so I asked him if I could spend one day a week with him looking at the businesses that he was seeing. And I had an opportunity to do that for about 6 weeks before he said, why don't you drop out of the PhD program and become a partner in this fund with me? And it took me a little while to decide that I wanted to do that, but it harkened back to a previous life before my PhD where I had worked for 2 years in VC. And in that time, I'd worked on a project where one of the conclusions we came to was that a really small fund writing small checks might actually be a really great business model. And all of the reasons why this was true actually became even more true in the course of the time I was in a PhD program. And so I paused at that moment, and I tried to figure out if this was something that I was really passionate about. And I compare that against a lot of what I believe entrepreneurs feel when they start up their businesses. It was this moment where actually I was told by a bunch of my own mentors and advisors to not go ahead and do that this was not the opportunity that I should be taking, that either I should start up my own thing or I should go work for a large VC firm. And just somewhere in my gut, I felt like that was the wrong answer, and this was something I had to do. And so it was something that was very hard for me to explain, but it was a natural extension of teaching students that became sort of, when you talk to an entrepreneur who's just starting a business, it's a lot like that teaching moment that we have in teaching these entrepreneurship courses at Stanford. So when I wake up in the morning, I'm more than excited to go to work. And I oftentimes tell people that you have to do something that you love so much that when you have your 3 kids crying and holding onto your leg in the morning and you're sort of kicking them away to get out the door, that you actually feel okay about it. And that you can look back and not feel guilty. And there are moments where you'll feel extraordinarily guilty because you aren't spending time with them, but at the moment where you're going into something that you feel like you're providing something that is really important, that's the moment where you know you're doing something right. And then this is something that my dad told me when I was a little girl. He always said, Anne, no matter what you do, be world class. And this picture sort of took me in, it felt like it represented a lot of that. Just me as a little girl always being told, whatever you do, be world class. And a few months ago, I read a bunch of blog articles about what does it even mean to be world class. It just feels like it doesn't mean anything. To me, it means everything. When I was first starting a job doing a work-study program in college, I was asked to do filing in an administrative office. And before I left for that job, my dad said to me, remember what I said, be world class. And I turned to my dad, I was like, well, stupid thing to say. I mean, I'm going to be filing and Xerox copying. Like, what am I really going to be doing? And he said, just be world class about it. And so I walked in, and I had that in the back of my head. And when I was first given a stack of papers to photocopy, I remember thinking to myself, this was just stuck in my head. I said, I'm going to make this like the fastest set of copies, but they're going to be so straight, and they're going to be shocked at how fast I do this. And I did that, and then I brought it back, and they said, well, here's some mail merges we need to do and address labels we need to put together. I put them all into Excel and I made these beautiful address labels. And that experience of really trying to be really good at seemingly meaningless tasks led me to a whole slew of opportunities that then led me to a lot of other things that were really meaningful in my life. And that has never left me. And I think that no matter what you do, if you say to yourself, I have to be one of the top 5 people who've ever done this job, even if you can't measure yourself against that metric, there is something meaningful in aspiring to that from a mental perspective. So whether you're coding something, designing something, investing in something, building something, helping someone, if you really put into your mind the perspective of, I have to be world-class in this moment, I believe that that changes everything. And ultimately, when you look back at work-life balance, and I've already said that that doesn't exist, if you can put your all into every moment, if you can put your all into your work, but your all into your life, you truly can work hard and play hard. And I think by doing your best in each of those elements and always striving to do your best in those moments, that you can become your best self. And the point of this talk has been to try to show you that no one is perfect, no one has that perfect existence, but at the same time, I think we're all striving to do our best. And so I would just encourage all of you that any moment, any minute, really think about that. And if you do, you'll find that your life becomes that much greater and that much more rewarding. Thank you.
Thanks.